It's strange, isn't it? It's just an ordinary word, but the same word was engraved in both our hearts, mine and Alex's. I was surprised to learn that she was thinking the same thing as me. For a moment, there was silence. It was a sweet silence for me. So sweet that I almost stumbled in front of the beautiful woman before me. My name is Alex. I'm 45 years old. I spent 3 years doing medical work near a conflict zone. But I returned to the States last month and will be working as a surgeon again at this general hospital, where I was previously assigned by my university, starting next month. 3 years ago, I took a leap of faith and left the university medical department to work in a conflict zone. When I talked to Dr. Smith, the director, he said he'd like me to work here again when I returned to the States. Taking him up on his offer, I contacted him as soon as I returned, and he told me that there was an opening in the surgery department. So he immediately decided to hire me. Today, I came to the general hospital to greet him and handle some paperwork, but it was lunchtime. Since I had already greeted the general surgery department to which I belonged, I thought I would go around and greet as many departments as possible, starting with the closest one, the orthopedics ward. When I knocked on the orthopedics office door, a male voice said, "Come in," so I entered the room. Inside was a slightly thin man wearing a spotless white coat. "Hello, my name is Alex. I'll be working in the surgery department starting next month." "Nice to meet you." When I greeted him, he said, "Oh, I see. I'm John. I'm quite popular, so the waiting room chairs might be filled with my patients. But nice to meet you." He said this with a smile, and I couldn't help but chuckle a little. Ever since I was interviewed recently, the number of patients has increased. It's been tough. I recently performed a rare surgery that became quite a topic around here. 30 minutes later. "Well, I'll be taking my leave now." I finally managed to say this and left his room. He seems to enjoy talking. Most of it was boasting, but he appears to be a diligent doctor. The cases he mentioned were all rare and could be easily missed without careful study. Although his stories were long and listening to his boasting was tiring, I was excited to have met someone I could learn and grow with. After greeting the other orthopedic doctors, lunchtime was over. I thought about visiting the other departments another day as I walked down the hallway towards the exit. From the other end, a beautiful woman in a white coat, presumably a doctor, was walking towards me. I approached her and spoke up. "Excuse me." The beautiful woman with sharp, defined features stopped. Her name tag read, "Internal Medicine Hannah." As I was about to introduce myself, her eyes widened and she said, "Alex, right? Have we met somewhere before?" "Yes, my name is Alex." When I said that, she put her hand to her mouth and said, "You're starting here next month? Really? I'm so happy." "Oh, I'm Hannah from Internal Medicine." Alex, you helped me a lot when I was a resident in surgery." "It was a short time, so you probably don't remember." I traced my memory. A faint image of a strong-willed, beautiful woman with sharp features came to mind. "I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but were you the top student at the university? You used to say, 'I'm the top of my class.'" When I said that, she exclaimed loudly, "Ah! Please stop. Why do you remember me like that?" "Well, it's my fault. I was too eager back then." When she said that, I clearly remembered and chuckled. She was very smart and often came to ask questions during her surgical training. It felt more like she was trying to argue rather than just ask questions. When she asked about a surgical procedure and I responded, she'd bring up an alternative technique. "If that technique is feasible, it might be better," I'd reply, and she'd show a satisfied smile. She was competitive and youthful, and I found her very likable. I admired the confidence that came from your hard work. It's an honor to work at the same hospital. I was going around to greet the different departments, but I got held up at orthopedics. I'll come to greet you properly another day." She had a knowing look on her face. "John, right? He talks a lot." She hit the nail on the head, and I laughed. "He sometimes invites me out, but I usually decline because he talks for so long." "If he invites you for drinks, Be prepared for a 3-hour ordeal. With that, she nodded and walked away. John, inviting people out. He's quite proactive. He mentioned he's the same age as me, 45. Hannah is probably about 10 years younger than me. I definitely don't have the courage to ask out such a beautiful woman who's 10 years younger. I left the hospital, thinking about these things. A month later. I had gotten used to working at the hospital, had many patients under my care, and was leading a busy life. Today was my first on-call duty since starting here. At our hospital, there is no dedicated emergency medicine doctor. So one doctor from surgery and one from internal medicine take turns handling the ER. Today's internal medicine doctor was Hannah. Nice to be working with you. I was met with a calm smile, and it made my heart skip a beat. Nice to be working with you. It's been a while since my last on-call shift. I'm a bit nervous. When I said that, she laughed. What's there to be nervous about? With your background. It's amazing. I respect you a lot. I scratched my head at her words. When I went to greet her before, she had asked about my background, so I mentioned my medical work near conflict zones. She was quite interested. Given that many people have negative opinions about that work, I don't usually bring it up. I only talk about it if asked. I understood the negative opinions better once I went there. But I fulfilled my duties properly. I'm proud of that. However, whether it's amazing is another matter. I felt a bit uncomfortable under her admiring gaze and smiled awkwardly. As I was preparing for the shift, John showed up. Hey, Alex, how's your first on-call duty going? I stood up and greeted him. John, I'm a bit nervous, I said with a smile. Upon hearing this, he sat down. I understand. I have some work left, so I'll stay here and do some overtime. Don't worry. If anything happens, I'll help out. Feel free to learn from my techniques. With that, he opened his laptop. Hannah then popped her head in. John. He will be fine. You don't need to push yourself. You should go home early. When she said that, he beamed. No, I'm not pushing myself. It's kind of you to worry about me, Hannah. I chuckled at their exchange. She looked a bit exasperated. That look almost made me burst out laughing. She probably realizes his feelings. She seemed to be taking a rather aloof attitude, but it didn't seem to get through. After that, he kept talking nonstop whenever there were no patients. He talked about gaining experience at various hospitals, the latest equipment, and how he often participated in study groups. While talking, he would glance over at the internal medicine area. The internal medicine consultation room was connected at the back, so there was a wall, but voices could be heard. He was speaking a bit louder so that Hannah could hear about his credentials, probably looking for her reaction. Of course, she didn't show up again. Then he lowered his voice and spoke to me. Hannah. She's great, isn't she? I was taken aback by the sudden talk of romance. Well, she is beautiful, I said, and he nodded vigorously. Not just that, she's also very capable. If I were to choose a partner, it would be someone as talented and beautiful as her. Which is why I'm still single. Hannah is exactly my ideal woman. I had thought his standards were high, and now I saw why. Indeed, she might be a rare find. She embodies talent and beauty, I thought. At that moment, a man's loud voice echoed through the quiet waiting room. Please. Help us. Hearing the urgent voice, I stepped out of the consultation room and looked at the waiting area. A man was pushing a woman in a hospital wheelchair towards us, shouting. The woman had a pained expression. Seeing her arms and face, I immediately understood the situation. Burns. I rushed over to them. What happened? The man, in tears, explained. This hospital is near a river, and while barbecuing on the riverbank, she felt the fire wasn't catching well and added some lighter fluid. A small amount splashed, landing on her arms and part of her face. Her consciousness and vitals were stable. I quickly examined the affected areas. The burns on her arms and around her nose were not deep. I checked her mouth and nasal passages to ensure there was no airway burn risk, and determined that I could handle the situation. The small amount of lighter fluid and lack of airway burns were fortunate. However, immediate treatment was crucial. Hey, this is beyond us. The burn area is too large. We don't have emergency medicine specialists or plastic surgeons. The dermatologist only comes once a week from the university. We need to transfer her to an emergency center. John looked in and began to issue instructions. No, we'll handle it here for now, I said firmly, surprising him. What are you talking about? This needs a specialist. If we make a mistake, she could. Ignoring his words, I started preparing for treatment. Hannah stepped in and answered him for me. Alex can handle it. Hearing her support, I focused on the task at hand. Phew. I took a deep breath and headed back to the treatment room. I thoroughly checked the patient's burns again. Burn treatment is a race against time. The burns around her nose were mild, but her arms had extensive second-degree burns, with some deeper spots. To prevent infection, I carefully cleaned the burns, removed any dead tissue, and applied ointment and gauze to protect the area and prevent infection in drying. Because of the extensive burns on her arms, I also administered IV fluids. Afterward, she was transported to a hospital equipped to handle such specialized care. Having finished the task, I returned to the consultation room, but there were no other patients to attend to. John, who had helped with the initial treatment, said, "I'll take care of the on-call duties," and immediately went to attend to the emergency patients. It was a very considerate gesture for him to cover for me with the emergency patients. When I returned, Hannah was the first to acknowledge my efforts. Good job. Her smile bringing me some relief. Next, John looked at me with a puzzled expression. Alex, how are you so proficient at treating burns? And so precisely. Quickly. I went to help, but I soon realized you didn't need me. How did you learn to do that? When he voiced his question, Hannah laughed. He has handled much more challenging cases in much harsher conditions, right? His eyes widened at her words. I was working in medical relief near conflict zones for 3 years, I said, and John looked genuinely astonished. Then, wow. I must apologize for my previous disrespectful attitude. I'm truly ashamed, he said profusely. I panicked. No, it's nothing. I'm still learning myself. When I was about to say that, he strongly objected. No. I deeply respect the medical work you've done under such challenging conditions with limited resources. I struggle with adapting to changes. So I have immense respect for someone who worked in such conditions for 3 years. I chuckled. Thank you. There are many who criticize that work, so your words mean a lot. There were many times I felt like giving up. Since I decided to become a doctor, I had always admired medical relief work in conflict zones. I wanted to use my skills to save as many lives as possible. When I felt confident enough in my medical skills, I left my medical department and headed to the conflict zone. However, reality was far different from my ideals. There were cases where, given enough time and resources, surgeries could save lives. But the lack of supplies and time forced me to make painful decisions. As more lives were lost, the value of each life seemed to diminish. Every day was a race to treat as many patients as possible. There were times I thought about returning to the States after just a few months. But my motto has always been, patient first. I never disregarded the wishes of patients and their families. I always provided the best possible care, considering the future lives of my patients. There were things I couldn't do. But the smiles of patients who recovered were my greatest support. In retrospect, it was a very valuable experience. Over there, I had to handle everything, and burns were very common. The key to burn treatment is speed, cleaning thoroughly, removing necrotic tissue, and preventing infection. This is a small town, and it takes a long time to transport patients to a trauma center. Unfortunately, it's nighttime, so the medical helicopter isn't available. If the patient had been transported without first aid, the necrosis would have progressed during the trip. Even just stopping that was a small victory. John suddenly grabbed my hand firmly, saying, "I'm deeply impressed. I'd love to hear more about your experiences. Please share more stories whenever you have time. I chuckled. No, I'm more interested in current American medical practices. Your stories are fascinating, John. Please share more with me as well. When I said that, Hannah chuckled softly. Alex, you're kind. I'd also love to hear more. Maybe you could find some time for just the two of us? Her words made me blush a bit. John seemed visibly disappointed. I think he needs a woman who can patiently listen to his stories, but that might be a high bar to clear. I thought to myself that a man 10 years older shouldn't take a young, beautiful woman's polite invitation seriously. Yet, she had meticulously arranged everything, including making a reservation at a restaurant. It was an American restaurant with private rooms. Since you were abroad for 3 years, I thought you might appreciate a place like this. I was impressed by her thoughtfulness. Indeed, I had been craving the carefully prepared flavors of American cuisine. But I wouldn't have had the courage to enter such a high-end place alone. Every dish that was brought out was deeply flavorful, and I was moved by each one. Hannah seemed to feel the same, her face showing delight with each bite. Her blissful expression was so beautiful that I couldn't help but look away. After some excellent liquor, Hannah, with flushed cheeks, spoke up. I've always wanted to thank you for your help during my training. If I hadn't met you back then, I might have been a different kind of doctor. She said this with a dreamy expression. Did I do something? I was just doing my job, and I don't think I was able to fully answer all your questions. When I said that, she shook her head slowly. I was quite sharp with others. I thought your gentle demeanor didn't quite fit. But back then, you performed several complex surgeries in one day, and still took the time to explain everything to the patients' families, without showing any signs of fatigue. Initially, I thought it was inefficient to spend so much time explaining things, thinking it would delay your recovery time for the next surgery. But seeing how relieved the families and patients were by your explanations, I realized I was being hasty and short-tempered. I aimed to become a doctor because my parents and teachers suggested it, saying I was smart enough. But my grandmother told me I'd make a kind doctor, which made me happiest. Seeing you reminded me that I wanted to be a kind doctor. She shared this while occasionally sipping beer. I was genuinely touched. Seeing families and patients relieved by my explanations was always the most gratifying part for me too. I was glad she had picked up on my patient-first philosophy by observing me. A thought suddenly crossed my mind. By the way, I think I heard the phrase, patient first, from you. It was a phrase that had supported me during my medical work in conflict zones. She thought for a moment and then smiled. I might have said that. On the last day of training, I was moved by your patient-first approach and might have mentioned it. It's not a particularly unique phrase, so it might not have been me. But I've been working with patient first as my motto ever since that day. So when you mentioned patient first while talking about your work in the conflict zone, I was a bit surprised. Maybe it was true. Maybe I had been carrying her words in my heart. Realizing this made me feel a sudden affection for her. We both had the same words engraved in our hearts all along. Maybe I had drunk too much. Hannah then said, "It's strange, isn't it?" Such an ordinary phrase. But it was engraved in both our hearts, yours and mine. I was further surprised that she had been thinking the same thing. There was a moment of silence. For me, it was a sweet silence. So sweet that I almost stumbled in front of the beautiful woman before me. But she was young, beautiful, and an excellent doctor. She deserved someone better than an older man like me, taking advantage of her momentary admiration. To break the sweet atmosphere, I said, "It's getting late. Thank you for making the reservation at such a lovely place. The food was truly delicious. I'll take care of the bill." I reached for the check, but she grabbed my hand. "Are you going to leave me without letting me say anything?" Her eyes pierced through me sharply. The strong-willed side of her was showing, and she was holding back tears, biting her lip. "I've studied hard to catch up with you, Alex. When I heard you left the university, I was really shocked. But I kept following your example, believing you wouldn't quit being a doctor. When we met again at this hospital, I thought it was fate. Please, let me support you. I was dizzy with emotion. Such a wonderful woman had been thinking of me for years and chasing after me. You're young, beautiful, and an excellent doctor. It would be a waste for you to settle for an older guy like me. I tried to push her away, but she retorted, I'm not just a young, beautiful, and excellent doctor. I'm Hannah, who has always loved you, Alex. I've decided long ago that I want to be with a kind, capable doctor like you. Don't build a wall based on age or appearance. Look at me for who I am. I was defeated. I couldn't push away a woman who cared so deeply for me. Especially not for a reason like me being unworthy. But I had one last thing to say. I'm not good at relationships. My words made her hesitate. I don't want you to support me, I want you to walk beside me. I want us to support each other and live our lives together. When I said that, she pouted at that. But, after chasing you for so many years, I can't imagine walking beside you unless you quit being a doctor. I laughed. What are you talking about? I heard all about how you handled emergencies the other night. I think you're already walking beside me. She shook her head vigorously, and I continued to smile. If anything, people will say, why is such a beautiful woman with such an old guy? I feel the same way. I'm not the kind of guy who deserves to walk beside you. When I said that, she pouted again. There you go again, talking about appearances. I've always kept my feelings in check. I didn't want to fall in love with this young, beautiful woman. I haven't been in a relationship for a long time. So, it might feel like I'm going through rehab. But I'd like to take things slow and build a relationship with you. Her face brightened at my words. She was truly beautiful and lovely. I'm so happy. I finally got through to you. I thought it would take much longer, but I'm so happy. She couldn't hold back her tears any longer, and they began to flow. I still wondered if I was the right person for her, but I wanted to cherish and protect her. Years later, we got married, and now we run a small practice in a rural area, providing medical care to the locals. Hannah's grandmother lived in this area, and after hearing that the local hospital had closed, making it difficult for the residents, we decided to open a clinic here. In this close-knit community, we do what we can with the help of the kind people around us. Today, I got home first and picked up our son from daycare. Living together and supporting each other makes me incredibly happy. I'm home. Sorry, I'm late. Grandma Lynn had a lot to say. Hannah said as she rushed into the living room. Holding our son, she sniffed the air. What's that smell? Did you cook? And you folded the laundry. Thank you. I smiled and said, You're welcome, as I headed to the kitchen to finish preparing dinner. A few years ago, she was the one chasing me. Now, I feel like I'm the one chasing her. Since we started dating, I've been head over heels for her, always wanting to see her happy face. Even now, her smile pierces my heart. After dinner, we took a bath and put our son to bed, watching him sleep. This is my favorite time of day. Hey, am I standing beside you properly? She sometimes asks things like this. Of course. Am I a man worthy of standing beside you? Of course. Now and always, you're my proud husband. We laugh, feeling embarrassed. Every day, we weave this happiness together, walking through a joyful life side by side. It was indeed a traffic accident. Worse yet, it involved injuries. A large sedan stopped on the road. And there were 3 people lying on the road. Blood quickly spread across the pavement. I immediately rushed to the injured. Can you hear me? I called out. First, I checked their level of consciousness, and then. My name is David, I'm 35 years old. I've been a nurse for 14 years. Today, I start working at a private nursing home by the sea. Since my student days, I've wanted to work in a facility for the elderly or a convalescent hospital. I felt that my calling in nursing was more aligned with long-term care, where I could spend time with each patient, rather than the acute care setting where patients come and go quickly. However, my nursing school preferred placements at its related hospitals. so I reluctantly took a job at the public hospital affiliated with the school. I requested to be assigned to a ward with many elderly patients, but that wish was not granted. I struggled in a tough environment for 5 years. But by my 5th year, I felt I had worked hard enough and deserved to pursue the type of nursing I wanted to do, so I decided to change jobs. I found a private hospital group that also ran many convalescent hospitals and nursing homes. During the interview, I confidently expressed my interest. I applied to this job because I believe I can engage in long-term care nursing at your institution. I'm single, so I'm willing to relocate anywhere. Thank you for considering me. The nursing director, Emma, smiled and said, I've always admired long-term care nursing, even though I've spent my career in acute care. We have many convalescent hospitals and facilities, so we can find a place that suits you. Naturally, I couldn't help but have high expectations. Later, I received a call that I was hired. However, I was told I would be placed in a similar department to my previous job. A staff member took sudden maternity leave and were short-handed. Having someone with your experience would be incredibly helpful. Could you please stay for just 6 months? Emma herself pleaded, and I couldn't say no. But what was supposed to be a 6-month stint dragged on to 9 years. When I turned 35, I realized I couldn't continue like this. I told Emma that I would either transfer or quit, and that's how I ended up at this nursing home. I moved into an apartment near the nursing home. The hospital covered the full rent as a subsidy. I bought an electric bicycle. In this area, there are few trains or buses, so most residents own cars. I have a driver's license, but I'm not confident driving since I'm essentially an inexperienced driver. Besides, maintaining a car is expensive. I figured the bicycle would suffice. I could do my shopping within cycling distance. On my first day, I rode my brand new bicycle to work. I took a deep breath of the morning air. The rich scent of the sea and the crisp, clear air. It might be the first time I've ever breathed air this fresh. The nursing home was on a hill. With an electric bike, the hill was no problem. The facility had a cute look with a red roof and ivory walls. I entered and greeted the receptionist. Good morning. I'm David, starting as a nurse today. Soon, the director, Alexander, came down to meet me. He was an elderly man in a polo shirt, with a gentle demeanor. After exchanging greetings, he promptly led me to the nurse's station. The nurse's station was more spacious than I had imagined. As I looked at the files lined up on the shelf with numbers on them, I began to feel a sense of dread. Could these be paper medical records? Being part of the digital generation and having poor handwriting, I lacked confidence in filling out paper medical records. I silently prayed that they had implemented electronic medical records. Alexander introduced me to the staff. This is David. It's his first time working in a facility like this, so he may be unfamiliar with some things, but he's determined to do his best. Please help him out. As a male nurse in a predominantly female workplace, it's crucial to read the room and have a gentle demeanor. It's important to take a step back when dealing with female colleagues. You shouldn't assert yourself too strongly. By always supporting the female staff and being reliable when needed, you can become the ideal male nurse. Those who can do this are well liked at work and, frankly, tend to be popular. There are even times when nurses compete for their attention. Unfortunately, I've never been in such a situation, but aside from Alexander, everyone here is female. I reminded myself to act in a way that wouldn't upset anyone. I'm Jessica, a nurse. We'll be working the day shift together today. Nice to meet you. She had a gentle smile and seemed a bit older than me. I noticed a ring on her left ring finger. I later learned that she was a housewife with 2 children. Jessica showed me around the home and explained the tasks. The caregivers mainly handle the care of the residents. This allows us to focus on nursing duties. What kind of nursing duties do we have? I asked. Morning vital checks, suctioning for those with respiratory issues, treating bed sores, feeding those with gastrostomy tubes at lunchtime. And of course, nursing records. That last one can be quite challenging. Are the nursing records on paper? I asked, hoping for a negative answer. Yes, but it's just for things like vitals, food intake, and bowel movements. You don't need to worry about writing detailed SOAP notes. SOAP is a format for nursing records that documents the patient's condition, the nurse's judgment, and actions taken. If I had to write SOAP notes on paper for everyone, it would be tough, so I was relieved. We don't do catheter changes, IVs, or injections here. The clinic next door handles those. We do handle blood draws, though. Are you comfortable with that, David? Blood draws? I don't have any issues with that. Jessica looked relieved. That's good to hear. A lot of the nurses who come here lack confidence in their skills. So we ask the doctors not to order blood draws when they're on duty. The doctors accommodate the nurses? That was unthinkable at my previous job. There, we were expected to learn to do everything and were often yelled at. I remembered those days. Okay, let's go check the vitals. Today you'll be in charge of this room. I took the blood pressure monitor and other vital equipment and headed to the designated room. On the way, an older woman called out to me. Are you a nurse? The enteral feeding is done, so could you please take care of it? She was quite elderly, with deep wrinkles covering her face. From her attire, I assumed she was a caregiver. Enteral feeding? This is my first day, so I'm not familiar with the procedures yet. Just remove the gastrostomy tube, right? You're a nurse, you can do it, can't you? We can't change the diapers with it in place. Please come. Hurry. I'm the type who follows orders when pressed. But when I faced the male resident, I froze. A tube was connected to his abdomen, delivering nutrition. Please, hurry and remove it. I realized I had never removed a gastrostomy tube before. Is it okay to just remove it like this? Do I need to do anything after removing it? Looking around the bed, I noticed a syringe filled with clear liquid. I assumed it was for flushing the tube. But I wasn't confident enough to proceed. Ugh, you're useless. The caregiver snapped before storming out. A short while later, she returned with Jessica. I'm sorry. I've never done this before, I admitted. What? Jessica was visibly shocked. But she kindly showed me how to disconnect the enteral feeding. The procedure was as I had guessed, but it was reassuring to have clear instructions. Next time, I would be able to do it without any issues. I'm sorry. I apologized to the caregiver for my inexperience. Well, we get all kinds of nurses here. Do your best. She said it with an exasperated tone. For a typical nurse, handling enteral feeding is basic. Being unable to do it made me feel looked down on. I realized I should have studied more before coming here. I had underestimated the job because it was a nursing home, and now I felt like I wanted to disappear. Jessica spent the rest of the day teaching me the ropes. She was very thorough in her explanations. Take your time. In a month, you'll be able to do everything, she reassured me. She also told me about the caregiver, Emily. Emily is the most experienced here. Even Alexander respects her. She can be difficult and says harsh things to newcomers. But she's not a bad person at heart. Don't let it bother you, and keep doing your best. I chuckled at the thought of Emily being the stereotypical difficult senior. I'll have to be careful around her. In the afternoon, I worked on the paper medical records. Although I was told not to worry too much about detailed entries, I noticed that past records were very thorough. The records included entries like, noticed photos of her grandchildren and mentioned them, which made her smile and listen to her feelings when she seemed lonely. She shared many stories from her youth and seemed satisfied, finishing all her meal afterward. These detailed notes reflected a compassionate approach to care and conveyed a warmth unique to handwritten records, making me smile as I read them. I wanted to get used to the job quickly so I could provide that kind of care. Hello. I was engrossed in the records when a voice called out from the other side of the nurse's station. A young woman in a white coat, with a stethoscope around her neck, clearly a doctor, greeted us. Hello, Dr. Smith. Jessica said happily as she approached the doctor. Dr. Smith worked at the clinic next to the home and visited once a week. She was about 5.1 feet tall. She had kind, large eyes and a very cute face. She looked quite young. Probably in her 20s. It was unusual for such a young doctor to work at a clinic, so there might be a reason behind it. Dr. Smith visits the nursing home once a week for house calls. She's very popular because she's so cute and kind, Jessica explained. I could see why, even I was becoming a fan. I finished my shift on time that day. One of the perks of this job was the lack of overtime. I decided to have dinner out. There was a diner along the coast that had caught my eye. It closed at 7 p.m., so I hurriedly pedaled my bike towards it. When I entered, I saw Dr. Smith inside. But she wasn't alone. She was sitting with a little girl. "Good evening." I greeted her, unsure if she would remember me since we had just met and barely spoken. Dr. Smith's face lit up immediately. "You're the nurse from the home, right?" "David." I was surprised she remembered my name. "Yes, that's right." "Nice to see you again, Dr. Smith." "Nice to see you too," she replied, then introduced the little girl next to her. "This is my daughter, Sarah. She's 6 years old." "Good evening," Sarah said. She looked just like her mother, very cute. Ah, so she's married. And to think she already has such a big daughter, it was a bit of a shock. "Will you be joining this table?" The waitress approached and asked me. I was about to say no, but Dr. Smith spoke up. "Would you like to join us for dinner?" she offered. Surprised, I looked at Dr. Smith and her daughter, both smiling at me. Would her husband be okay with this? I wondered, but I also wanted to talk to Dr. Smith more. I'd be happy to. I agreed to share the table. Dr. Smith ordered a grilled fish set meal, and Sarah ordered an omelet. I also opted for the grilled fish set meal. "You look so young, I didn't expect you to have a child," I said honestly. Dr. Smith gave a wry smile. "I get that a lot. I'm actually 32. I had Sarah during my residency." 32. That's still quite young for a doctor. And having a baby during residency must have been incredibly challenging. I had to take maternity leave when I should have been building my foundation as a doctor. Even after I returned, balancing work and childcare was impossible, she explained. I wondered if her husband had been supportive. When I asked, she spoke with a hint of bitterness. My husband at the time was also a doctor. He didn't help with childcare at all. Whenever Sarah had a fever and the daycare called, I was the one who had to go get her. At the college hospital, people looked down on me. Then my husband had an affair. So I divorced him and came back to my hometown. I had suspected there was a story behind her situation, but I didn't expect it to be so tough. In the nursing world, which is predominantly female, there are systems in place to help balance work and childcare. But the medical field is still largely male-dominated. It might be even harder for women to work while raising children. That's why I can't do much as a doctor. But when I was asked to work at this clinic, I was told I only needed to prescribe medication and conduct checkups. If there was anything too difficult, I could refer the patient to a nearby large hospital. I thought I could manage that, so I decided to work at the clinic. Dr. Smith spoke about the clinic with a happy expression. Becoming a doctor is incredibly hard. It takes a lot of intelligence, money, time, and effort. After all the hard work she put into earning her medical degree, it's only natural to want to utilize it by working diligently at a college hospital or similar institution. But Dr. Smith chose to work at a small clinic by the sea while raising her child. She must be a family-oriented, down-to-earth person, I thought, feeling a warmth in my chest. There's something about being with Dr. Smith that makes me feel incredibly happy. Maybe it's her appearance, her charm, or her kind personality that attracts me. It's been a long time since I felt this way around a woman. At that moment, I imagined myself walking along the seaside with Dr. Smith and Sarah. "Dad. Let's go over there next." "Hey, Sarah, he's not your dad." But he will be soon, right? Calm down. Stop daydreaming. She's a doctor. Her previous husband was a doctor too, so there's no way she'd be interested in me. Sorry for the wait. The waitress placed our food in front of us. Looks delicious. Sarah's face lit up at the sight of her steaming omelet. I almost let out a cheer myself. Despite being a grilled fish set meal for less than $10, it was incredibly luxurious. Grilled mackerel, simmered vegetables, seafood soup, and even a small dessert. It's amazing. The fish is so fresh and delicious, I prefer eating here over cooking at home. I could easily become a regular here. The food was so good that I was almost ending up getting a second meal. A month had passed since I transferred to the home. I had become quite accustomed to the job. I'll connect James' nutrition line. I've already treated Michael's bed sores. John's oxygen saturation was low, so I performed suction. It's now at 98%. As I became more efficient, the staff's perception of me changed. One day, Emily gestured for me to follow her. She led me to the caregiver's break room. A gift from one of the residents. This is for you. It was a small chestnut cookie. Thank you. I was happy to feel recognized as part of the team. As I became more efficient at my job, I naturally found myself with more time. I made an effort to communicate with the residents. I'm not great at just chatting, so I would engage in conversations while doing things like nail clipping or foot baths. The home had a sunroom. Sitting there, clipping nails and chatting with residents, brought a strange sense of peace. My nail trimming skills were well received, and many residents began requesting, "Could you cut my nails?" Life at the home felt timeless. But then, an incident occurred. One day, while I was leisurely clipping nails, I heard the screech of brakes followed by a loud crash of shattering glass. Ah! A woman's scream. It must be an accident. I stood up. Sorry, I need to go check on that. I apologized to the resident and rushed out of the facility. It was indeed a traffic accident. And worst of all, it involved pedestrians. A large sedan stopped on the road. 3 people were lying on the road. Blood quickly spreading on the pavement. What should we do? I noticed Emily was standing next to me. But she was pale and trembling. Let's check on the injured first. I immediately ran to the injured people. I went to the one with the most bleeding first. She was a woman in her 40s. There was bleeding from her thigh, possibly from an artery. I quickly applied pressure to the suspected bleeding area with my palm. Fortunately, I was still wearing gloves from the nail clipping. In situations like this, I could touch the blood without hesitation. "Can you hear me?" I called out, and she barely opened her eyes and nodded slightly. "Oh, she's alive!" Emily exclaimed happily. "Emily, call an ambulance and get the other staff. Tell everyone to wear gloves." "Got it." Emily's face turned serious as she ran back to the home. It was then. This is. I turned around and saw Dr. Smith. She looked even paler than Emily. Dr. Smith. She's at consciousness level 2. The only visible external injury is to her thigh, but it may be arterial bleeding. She might be drifting in and out due to blood loss. I reported the patient's condition to Dr. Smith. "I'm sorry. I don't know what to do in situations like this." "Of course." I bit my lip. In medical emergencies, doctors are the primary responders. Nurses can only assist. But only until the ambulance arrives. Dr. Smith and I will have to manage until then. "Dr. Smith, you have gloves and a face shield, right? Could you take over applying pressure?" "All right." I carefully switched places with Dr. Smith. The transition went smoothly. There were still 2 more injured people. One was completely motionless, and the other was a young woman clutching her abdomen and crying, "It hurts." I ran to the crying woman. "My stomach hurts. It hurts so much." There were no visible external injuries, but there might be internal damage. I quickly took her wrist to check her pulse. It was strong. Her consciousness was clear, and there was nothing more I could do at the moment. "An ambulance is on its way. Hang in there a little longer." Encouraging her loudly, she nodded in response. "Okay." I then ran to the motionless person. A man in his 40s. He was bleeding from the head, unconscious, and not breathing. His heart had stopped. I immediately started chest compressions. The key to saving a life is how quickly and continuously chest compressions, or CPR, are performed. but I wouldn't be able to sustain it alone for long. When performing chest compressions, it's standard to switch in teams. With 3 people, we could keep going for an hour. David. I called the ambulance and brought everyone. Also, I have gauze and towels. It was Emily. How reliable she is, bringing the necessary items for stopping the bleeding. Thank you. Emily, can you switch with Dr. Smith for the bleeding control? Yes. Emily immediately went to Dr. Smith. Can someone bring an ambu bag and an oxygen tank? I asked the caregivers who had come. However, they all looked confused. I understand the oxygen tank, but what's an ambu bag? It's the thing that pumps air like a pump. It's on the top right shelf in the nurse's station. Oh. That thing. One of the caregivers clapped his hands and went back to the home. David, I'll take over chest compressions. It was a young male caregiver. Can you do it? I've done it during training. I was relieved. My arms were about to give out. I switched with the caregiver. David. How's it going over there? It was Dr. Smith. This one is in cardiac arrest. There's a head injury. Really? What should I do? I knew Dr. Smith couldn't handle intubation. So, I thought about having her establish an IV line and administer adrenaline. Adrenaline is used during cardiac arrest. Dr. Smith, please go back to the clinic and bring as much IV fluid and adrenaline as you can find, along with normal saline, IV sets, and syringes. Got it. Soon, Dr. Smith returned with a basket full of supplies. There was only 1 vial of adrenaline. That's enough. I opened the adrenaline and drew it into a syringe. Of course, I also mixed it with normal saline. Dr. Smith, can you start an IV line? Yes. But I can't see a vein. Seeing she couldn't manage, I took over. Starting an IV in an emergency has its tricks. Usually, the vein on the inside of the hand is used, but in emergencies, the vein on the outside of the wrist is preferred. It's right above the bone, so the vein is easier to find. However, it's thin, so it requires skill. Being experienced, I quickly inserted the needle. Doctor, please administer the adrenaline. Who are you? Dr. Smith looked up at me with a puzzled expression. I was a nurse from the emergency medical center. I worked at a public hospital for 5 years right after graduation. Then, I spent 9 years at a private hospital. I wanted to work on a ward. However, due to my good grades in nursing school and the perception that men have more physical strength, I was assigned to the emergency center. An ambulance. Someone with good hearing must be around. A bit later, I also started to hear the siren of the ambulance. I looked around. One person with abdominal pain had a caregiver by their side, speaking to them. They were conscious and seemed calm. Emily was desperately continuing to stop the bleeding for the person with the thigh injury. The person in cardiac arrest was receiving chest compressions alternately from the caregivers, and air was being pumped in with the ambu bag. I had no idea what would happen to these people. But I felt that we had done what we could. Just a little more. Let's hang in there. I encouraged everyone. Yes. A strong response came back. Dr. Smith and I decided to ride in the ambulance. Amazingly, the person in cardiac arrest started to regain a heartbeat and breathing inside the ambulance. They were still in critical condition, but at least they hadn't died on the spot. I prayed that they would survive at the hospital. Excellent response. Were you in emergency care? Dr. Brown, the head of emergency at the receiving hospital, praised me. Actually, I mentioned the name of my previous hospital. That's one of the top hospitals in the country in terms of patient volume. You're truly a wonderful nurse. How about joining our hospital? I was scouted. Of course, I politely declined. They gave me a ride back to the facility in the ambulance. Thank you, Dr. Smith. I cheerfully expressed my gratitude. You were an amazing emergency nurse. Dr. Smith said sadly. No, not really. But she looked down, and the atmosphere became awkward. The next day, I received a call from Emma, the head nurse at the main hospital. David, I heard about your performance. You really are suited for emergency care. Would you consider coming back? Everyone's waiting for you. Indeed, the emergency field might suit me, where every second counts. And I use both my mind and body to the fullest to provide life-saving measures. That environment gave me a strong sense of being alive, like an adrenaline rush. I am suited for emergency care. And with 14 years of experience, I am skilled. Perhaps I should be where I am needed. But I couldn't answer right away, so I said, "Let me think about it," and hung up. The next day arrived without a conclusion. It was a workday at the nursing home. A peaceful and calm place, as if nothing had happened. I felt healed, truly. At that moment, Emily beckoned me over. "David, come here." Was it for patient care? I followed her and was led to the dining hall. There, residents had gathered, along with Alexander, caregivers, Jessica who was supposed to be off, and even Dr. Smith. As I stood there in a daze, Emily brought in a big cake. "David, happy birthday. Happy 36th. Thank you for everything. I never expected to have my birthday celebrated." The unexpected surprise brought tears to my eyes. "You were so cool the other day." It was my first time seeing something like that, and it made my heart race. Emily blushed like a schoolgirl. "Thanks to you, David, the awareness among caregivers and nurses has increased. We're even planning a training session on emergency care," said Alexander. Jessica also spoke to me. "I knew from the start that you weren't just anyone, David. Who was the one saying this guy can't even remove a PEG tube, he's dangerous, the loudest?" Emily teased Jessica, who responded by sticking out her tongue playfully. Then Dr. Smith spoke up. "Happy birthday. All the people from the other day have recovered. It's all thanks to you, David. Truly, thank you." I shook my head. "No, if you hadn't been there, Dr. Smith, who knows what would have happened." "Thank you." Then, Dr. Smith spoke hesitantly. "Are you going back to the emergency center?" Thinking about my future as a nurse, salary, and other considerations made me a bit unsure, but my heart was already set. I knew where I wanted to be. After 14 years as a nurse, I finally found my place. "I'll stay here." As soon as I said that, Dr. Smith smiled. It was a beautiful smile, like a flower blooming. "I'm so happy. Let's continue working together." I firmly shook the hand Dr. Smith offered. Oh, how warm and soft it is. I wanted to keep holding it forever. "Me too." To my surprise, Emily placed her hand over ours. "Oh, me too." "And me." One after another, the residents and staff joined in, almost crushing me under their hands. A year later, Dr. Smith and I had started dating after that day. Today, we were out clam digging with Sarah. "Dad. Let's go over there next." "Hey, Sarah. He's not dad yet, remember?" Sarah had already grown very fond of me. It might be time to ask the question. Would you make me Sarah's dad? David. Yay! Seeing their happy faces, I felt confident about the proposal. But, it feels a bit like you're only in it for Sarah. Oops. That came out wrong. I quickly corrected myself. Would you be my partner, Dr. Smith? Together, let's support the healthcare of this town. Oh, David, you're so serious. Yes, I'd be happy to be your partner. Yay! He's really going to be my dad. After 15 years as a nurse, I had worked in places I didn't want to be, but I decided to pursue the work I truly wanted to do, and I found happiness. I plan to cherish it for the rest of my life. Useless is useless, after all. No excuses. That's why you're still just a manager at your age. It's funny how falling off the career track leads to this. Everyone, take a good look. This is what happens when you fell off the career track. If you don't want to end up like this, strive for success. I, who had fallen from the elite path and was languishing as an incompetent employee, was transferred to a warehouse in a depopulated area due to a mistake I didn't even remember making. However, I made a decision there. A while later, my boss, who had called me useless, contacted me. "Who are you?" He seemed unaware that I had been pretending to be incompetent. "I am David. I moved to New York after graduating from a local high school. After graduating from a prestigious university, I joined a major trading company in the city. With some confidence in my language skills from studying abroad during my student days, my linguistic abilities were quickly recognized by my superiors, and I was entrusted with many interactions with overseas clients. Thankfully, my performance improved, and I was promoted to manager faster than any of my peers. With my alma mater being something to be proud of, people often said I was on the elite track. But, of course, not everyone was happy with my picture-perfect life. In a culture where cooperation was rare and competition for performance and promotion was fierce, anyone who excelled was a target. Many employees had quit because of this environment, and I too became a target. The main instigators were a few colleagues from my department, including Tom, who was in the same cohort as me. They were unhappy that I was the only one who had been promoted. They conspired to sabotage me, subjecting me to daily harassment. I was excluded from important updates, and the company car I had reserved was taken without permission. Each act was minor, and Tom and others skillfully made excuses to avoid blame. Initially, I was confident and off to a smooth start as a manager, but the constant petty harassment gradually wore me down. One day, my calls from clients were not transferred to me, and my work was stolen. That might have been the final clincher. Was it my fault? What did I do to them? I wanted to prove them wrong with my hard work. But when I saw Tom succeeding with work that should have been mine and looking down on me, my spirit quietly broke. To advance beyond manager, passing an internal exam was a mandatory requirement. "David, you could easily get promoted. Just take the exam," urged my manager, Mark, and my director, Robert. I initially prepared for it, but as I became more mentally exhausted, I lost all motivation. In fact, the thought of passing the exam and facing even worse harassment terrified me. What if it escalated beyond stolen work to something irreparable? Fear paralyzed me, and I couldn't prepare for the exam. I wasn't even willing to take the exam. "David, what's wrong? I thought you'd pass this exam easily." "Sorry. It seems I'm not ready yet." "David, is something wrong? If you have concerns, talk to me." "No, I'm fine. It was just a lack of ability on my part. I'm sorry for wasting the recommendation. I failed the first exam." Mark was worried, but I said nothing. I was repeatedly urged to take the exam, and even when I refused, my name would appear on the list. But I couldn't muster any motivation, so I deliberately failed multiple times. "He failed again, didn't he? Is that exam really that tough?" "No, Mark said David should pass easily, so it can't be that hard." "Either way, he chickened out, right? He's just a loser now. Maybe his past achievements weren't even his own." "Wow, if that's true, that's the worst." I knew there were rumors, both true and false. But I didn't even feel like arguing back. I no longer cared about any of it. "David. Mark, please, just don't worry about me anymore." And so, without even realizing it, I quietly fell off the path everyone once recognized as elite. After stepping off the elite track, the harassment from Tom and his group stopped. Of course, it did. There was no longer any reason for them to be jealous. But the trauma from those days and my deteriorated mental state left me as a shadow of my former self, stuck as an incompetent employee. "Is David in bad shape lately, isn't he? I heard he even stopped taking the promotion exams." "Yeah, the rumor is that he's given up on promoting." I had grown used to hearing such rumors. Watching Tom and my other peers rapidly get promoted after I had fallen, I often found myself thinking, what does it mean to be peers? To them, was I just an obstacle? What were all those days even for? Peers should be comrades who share joys and sorrows, right? They should be people you trust and rely on more than anyone else in the company, right? At least, that's how I viewed them back then. I thought we were important to each other. But after being betrayed, I became scared to trust anyone again. I chose to live quietly, avoiding the spotlight as much as possible. I knew I was stagnating as a businessman. I understood what awaited me as a result of choosing this path. But I never wanted to experience that kind of pain again. I didn't mind if people continued to call me a failure for the rest of my life. This was fine. I continued my days quietly, without taking on big projects or showing any ambition, just steadily doing my existing work. I wanted to be the kind of person that no one cares if I'm there or not, and I'm there when they notice me. As I worked with this mindset, the years passed, and before I knew it, I was 50. I had never been promoted beyond manager, experiencing neither joy nor much sadness. Even though every day was the same, it was far more comfortable than being hurt. Fortunately, my colleagues recognized me as someone who doesn't get promoted but is diligent in his work, and someone who, while not advancing, is competent enough at his job. They trusted me, perhaps because they didn't see me as a threat. With 10 years left until retirement, I decided to continue living quietly. Or so I thought, until one day. I'm James. I look forward to working with you. I'm David, a manager. Nice to meet you. Are you the so-called incompetent manager? Yes. I heard from Tom, your peer. He said you once got lucky enough to get on the career track but ended up falling miserably. I see. What a weirdo. James, my younger boss who had just joined the company. For some reason, he had heard about my reputation from Tom and sneered as he made those remarks. David, don't let it bother you. We don't think that way at all. That's right. Everyone in our department knows you're great at your job. Thank you, everyone. I'm fine, let's get back to work. Perhaps because I had no prospects for advancement, my colleagues were kind to me in this competitive environment. I knew they pitied me. Thanking my supportive colleagues, I returned to my work. However, during a break when I went to the restroom, I overheard someone talking about me. James, how's the new team? Got some good people, right? Yeah, well, they're all right. But that manager, David, that guy's something else. James was talking to an employee from a neighboring department. I couldn't help but stop and listen to their conversation. David? His reputation is pretty good. Did something happen? The thing is, there's just nothing remarkable about him, good or bad. It's like he's just going through the motions. It's scary how he has no ambition. I mean, being just a manager at his age is already a red flag. Really? But I've heard he's quick and meticulous with his work. Come on. That's just the bare minimum. Everyone does that. He does the same thing every day. He never submits project proposals. And in meetings, he only speaks when asked directly. He never stays late and leaves right at quitting time. When new projects come up, he always hands them off to younger employees. Does he even care about his job? Is he mocking it? Wow, really? Yeah. He's hopeless. Honestly useless. No wonder he's still just a manager. Ambition. I had abandoned that long ago. Whether I got promoted or not, I was still looked down upon. Even though I had chosen this path myself, it still hurt a little. What was my life even for? With a faint smile, I headed to another floor's restroom. James was back at his desk an hour later after his meeting. David. Yes? We're moving forward with this proposal. Please have the other employees review it. Understood. Oh, and since you won't be participating in this project, you don't need to read it yourself. Despite being taken aback by his blatant sarcasm, James handed me a copy of the proposal with a look of disdain. As I took it and started to walk away, he added with a smirk, "It must be tough working under someone younger, but let's try to get along." I'm counting on you, David. Then one day, something happened. What? Yes, I'll check immediately and get back to you. What's wrong? Well, it's about one of David's accounts. There's been a misorder, and the other company is in a huge mess because of it. What? The call my subordinate took. It was from one of my clients. Before I could take over, the client had been yelling over the phone, leaving the young woman's hands trembling. I'll check it out immediately, you can take a break. But? It's okay, just calm down first. Thank you. Even though I told her to calm down, I was the one most panicking. This can't be happening. This client was one I had been handling for years. In all those years, I had never made such a mistake. Of course, no one is immune to mistakes. But I distinctly remember double-checking this order multiple times. A misorder? That can't be right. However, upon checking, one of the order entries had a typo in the product code, resulting in a large quantity of the wrong product being shipped. Product code errors are indeed common. That's why I had checked it so many times. But why now? As I was bewildered, James, who had been away, rushed over after hearing the commotion. David! What is going on here? It seems to be a misorder due to an incorrect product code entry. This project is under David's responsibility. How do you plan to handle this? Wait a minute. I checked the order multiple times before placing it. Then how did this mistake happen? Well, I had no proof that I had thoroughly checked it. You say you checked it, but you were probably just working roughly. Useless is useless, after all. James, I'll report this to the higher-ups. For now, you need to go apologize to the client and resolve this issue immediately. We'll talk after that. James shouted and then stormed out of the department. David, what's going to happen now? I couldn't even respond to my subordinates. I went to the client to apologize, and fortunately, due to our long-standing relationship, they agreed to let it slide this time. However, future transactions would now favor them. I couldn't understand how this had happened. But James didn't bother to investigate and placed all the blame on me. Clearly, this is David's mistake. But no excuses. That's why you're still just a manager at your age. It's funny how falling off the career track leads to this. Everyone, take a good look. This is what happens when you fell off the career track. If you don't want to end up like this, strive for success. James publicly humiliated me in front of everyone, making me a laughingstock. He was the only one laughing. All my subordinates turned their eyes away. I didn't feel anger or sadness anymore. I just felt empty. The transfer order came 3 days later. David is going to be transferred. Transfer? That sounds nice, but it's really a demotion, right? I've never heard of the place he's being sent to. Me neither. It's a rural area. I've heard it's where they send people who've caused problems. Wow, that's bad. I better be careful. Shh, keep it down. He might hear you. Oops. I bowed my head to my gossiping subordinates. I'm sorry for the trouble. Thank you for everything. David, please do your best out there. Thank you. Even though saying this might make you all laugh at me, I'm rooting for you. I hope you all do well. With that farewell, I left the department. My new assignment was at a warehouse in a rural area in another state. As my subordinates had said, it was essentially a demotion. I had only heard rumors about the warehouse. But at over 50 years old, I had no other choice but to go there. The warehouse was in poor condition and it was old. The location was remote, requiring a car for commuting. Although there was a bus stop, it was desolate and only had 2 buses a day. Since I didn't own a car, I was provided a company car for commuting. Good morning. I'll be working here from today. My name is David. On my first day, I nervously opened the door to the office next to the warehouse, where about 15 employees were present. The atmosphere was gloomy, and everyone looked dispirited. Oh, you must be David. Welcome to this dump. You must have gone through a lot, said a weary-looking man, apparently the manager here, John. Despite his title, it seemed he had also been demoted here after losing his drive in the competitive environment at the main office. It seemed that the other employees were similar, having little confidence and having struggled at the main office. The work itself was easier. Previously, my work had been primarily desk work, but here I started by learning the names of the warehouse machines with guidance. Eventually, I would also inspect machines and manufacture parts. After working for a while, I realized that the warehouse staff, despite their lack of confidence, were not the type to drag each other down or harass one another. Of course, they were all people who had been on the receiving end of such treatment. They understood each other's feelings, showing empathy and cooperation, which felt refreshing. In this environment, my mental state began to stabilize. I had completely lost my motivation, but I wanted to help the employees here who had accepted me. That's how I began to feel. I used to pretend to be incompetent to avoid the elite path. But here, I thought I might actually be able to do my best. While the human relationships seemed problem-free, the warehouse division had a lot of issues. Listing them out filled my notes, but the biggest issue was the lack of an inventory management process. I decided to start by boosting the staff's confidence. For the first time in a while, I felt motivated. I approached John and declared, "I want to solve the problems in this warehouse and raise the employees' motivation." John, who was indifferent, told me to do as I pleased, so I gratefully began to act. How could I help everyone regain their confidence? I realized that praising them might be essential. These people had been ridiculed and looked down upon at the main office. No matter how old you are, everyone appreciates being praised. I revamped the inventory management process and distributed the tasks to the employees. It's not too difficult, so please give it a try. Yes, understood. Although they seemed hesitant, the employees were diligent and followed instructions. I praised them generously, perhaps excessively, each time. I showed them the work, let them try it, and then praised them. By repeating this process, I aimed to brighten their spirits. As a result, the employees began to take the initiative in learning new tasks, increasing efficiency and motivation, and gaining confidence. Before long, not only did we streamline the processes, but the employees also developed software to make management easier and more accurate, continuously improving it for everyone's use. Simultaneously, the sudden rise in the warehouse division's operational level, previously ridiculed by the main office, caused quite a stir. The warehouse division, where I was now, was tacitly known as a place where demoted employees were sent. It was supposed to be a dumping ground for those who couldn't quit, just doing the bare minimum. Suddenly, it began operating at a remarkably high level. Naturally, everyone was surprised. President Smith, curious about the dramatic improvement, instructed Vice President Stephen, saying, "Go and find out why the operational level has increased so much. We can't have any data falsification, so check thoroughly." Stephen arrived early in the morning to check things out. Stephen had visited the warehouse a few times before, ostensibly for inspections but mainly to ensure no one was slacking off. Previously, he would see the demoralized faces of the employees, sigh, and leave quickly. This time was different. "Hi, Stephen. Thank you for coming all this way. Please take a look at our new software if you have time." The bright voices were totally different from the previously gloomy atmosphere. Even the warehouse, which had seemed dark and stagnant, appeared rejuvenated. "Oh, you there. May I have a word?" "Yes?" "Recently, the performance of this warehouse division has been exceptionally good. Smith is curious if there's a reason behind it. Can you tell me what has changed?" The employee who was stopped smiled at Stephen. "Well, it's because we have Dave with us." "What?" Not understanding what they meant, Stephen stopped several other employees to ask the same question. Each time, they responded with, "It's because of Dave." This puzzled Stephen even more. "Wait, hold on. Who or what is Dave? Can someone explain this to me?" Several employees exchanged glances and laughed. "They're talking about David. Ever since he came here, everyone has been working happily as if they've been reborn." "David, the one recently transferred from the main office?" "Yes. David helped us regain our confidence and motivated us. Until now, we were only reprimanded and never praised. We were just doing what we were told. But David thanked and praised us for even the basic things, which made us happy. He reminded us of the joy of being appreciated and the fun of work." After hearing the details, Stephen asked, "Could I speak with David for a bit?" and called for me. "Stephen, long time no see." "Indeed. How have you been?" "Quite well, actually. I feel like I can work more enjoyably and authentically here than I did at the main office. It seems this place suits me better." "I see. I've heard you've been motivating the other employees." "Thank you very much. No, I was just lucky that things worked out." Also, it was frustrating to hear this place being called a dumping ground. I understand. I'll apologize to everyone. Thank you. No, you don't need to apologize. Stephen had been struggling with how to boost the motivation of this department. He apologized to everyone and returned to the main office. A few days later, Stephen called James from the main office. It seemed he was questioning the reason for my demotion. Stephen began to question the discrepancy between the order mistake he had heard about from James and what he observed from me and the employees' feedback. He decided to reinvestigate to determine if the order mistake was truly my fault. What he discovered was completely unexpected. He instructed the IT department to check the operation logs on my PC and found that after I had correctly entered the data, James had logged in with his account and altered it to incorrect information. When this was revealed, James literally collapsed in front of everyone. According to what Stephen told me later, James admitted that managing an older subordinate like me was troublesome. He resented my prestigious university background and wanted to undermine me, thinking that my lack of project proposals indicated I wasn't as capable as my education suggested. He confessed all this while looking pale and defeated. I see. I should have investigated properly back then. I know it's too late now, but I'm truly sorry. No, it's not your fault. Don't apologize. Besides, I'm glad I ended up here. This place helped me regain confidence in myself and realize that I can still contribute to the company. Thank you. You are an invaluable asset to this company. It's a shame you're not back at the main office. That's too kind of you. I mean it sincerely. Thank you. Feeling deeply grateful for Stephen's kind words, I ended the call. I was ready to continue working steadily from here. Just as I had that thought. What, a transfer to the main office? I received a transfer order. It was James who informed me over the phone. Moreover, it included a promotion to an executive position. Who are you? I could hear James's trembling voice over the phone. It seemed he was quite afraid of me. Weren't you just a demotivated employee, just a useless 50-year-old? Repeating these words, James sounded utterly confused. I slowly smiled. It's not wrong. I am just a 50-year-old man. Having been mentally exhausted from being sabotaged by my peers and colleagues, I had been doing mundane work for a long time. However, the work here had been enjoyable for the first time in a while. I felt like my efforts were being recognized, and that made me happy. Yes, work can be fun. This place reminded me of that. It had taken a long time to get here, but is it still possible to make a difference? I didn't know if I could perform as well at the main office as I had here. But I wanted to meet the expectations of Stephen, who had personally called me back to the main office. With that resolve, I returned to the main office. Upon my return, Stephen asked me to attend an executive meeting immediately. The other executives apologized to me for the recent events. They asked if I had anything to say, and I replied, I believe competition among employees is important. However, when it leads to undermining each other, it's counterproductive. Instead of pulling each other down, if we work together and strive to improve as a team, our company can achieve better results. I want to use this experience to review our current practices and improve our company's structure. Though I was prepared for rejection, my suggestion was unexpectedly approved right away. Until now, we focus solely on growing the company, causing employees like you great hardship. Please go forward to lead the way in transforming our company into a place where everyone can work with peace of mind. Nodding in agreement with Smith's words, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. As an executive, I promptly introduced and implemented various measures. Shifting from a competitive environment. We started by following the same method I used in the warehouse division, assigning tasks and offering praise to boost employees' confidence. I felt a noticeable improvement in workplace relationships, which had previously been strained, and I was eager to continue. As individual work transformed into teamwork, there was initial resistance from some employees, but ultimately, this approach improved motivation and performance, and our company's results began to rise. The high turnover rate, which had been a concern, also started to decline. Seeing everyone work with smiles on their faces, and hearing "It's all thanks to you, David," made me incredibly happy. I had lost my confidence for a long time and endured a painful period. But those difficult days allowed me to want to change this company now. If I had forced myself to stay on the elite path, I might have broken down and left the company eventually. While I was desperately trying to protect myself, those days were not in vain. That's what I believe. And I think it's enough that I was the only one to go through such hardship. I don't want the new young employees to experience the same. I want them to enjoy their work. To work with vitality. To have goals and strive together with smiles on their faces. Even if it sounds idealistic, that is my current goal and my purpose in life. With only a little time left until retirement, I am firmly resolved to continue creating a work environment where everyone can thrive. I'm at my limit. The hostess looked at me with tear-swollen eyes. Leave it to me, I said. When I gazed at her, she lowered her eyes and blushed, saying, I've never seen something this magnificent before. I never thought I'd use this again. My heart started pounding as I held the familiar object in my hand. While setting up a tent by the lake and fishing, I heard the sound of an ambulance in the distance. I didn't pay much attention and continued fishing, but the siren kept getting closer. When I turned around, I saw an ambulance parked in front of a building I thought was abandoned on the opposite shore. I'd been camping here for 3 days, enjoying solo camping and fishing. The building didn't look like a regular house, it resembled a lodge or a drive-in, with no cars or people coming in or out. And no lights on at night, so I assumed it was an abandoned place. An ambulance means someone was there. Could it be that someone died in the empty building? There have been a lot of alarming news stories lately. If my guess was right, I've been camping next to a place where someone might have died for 3 days. Maybe I should move to another spot. This is creeping me out. I felt a chill run down my spine. Eventually, the ambulance drove away, probably with someone inside. It was too far to see the details from here. Alright, I'll stay one more night and then leave this place. I decided and started preparing dinner by the lake. My name is David, and I'm a 40-year-old unemployed man. I skillfully started a fire, cleaned the fish I caught with a small knife, salted them, and put them on the fire. For sides, I seasoned leafy vegetables I bought at a nearby farmer's market with just olive oil and salt and pepper. Tonight's dinner was perfectly grilled fish, some cheese from a convenience store, and a salad of fresh local vegetables, accompanied by a glass of hot whiskey, which I allowed myself. As the sun set, I felt a bit of peace return to my heart while enjoying the meal by the fire. In the past, I used to be particular about the origin of ingredients and believed that good food had to be expensive. But now, fish caught in an unnamed lake and cheese from a convenience store tasted incredibly good. The lake, reflecting the red hues of the sunset, was calm, and I could hear the cawing of crows. The shouts echoing in the kitchen, the clattering of dishes, and the mix of various food aromas in the heated environment, all those memories of my hectic life seemed like a distant dream. I've been living this way for 8 months now. I wasn't always unemployed. I used to be the head chef at a 5-star hotel restaurant in New York. After high school, I went to culinary school to learn the basics of cooking, and after graduating, I moved overseas to train at a restaurant in Paris for 10 years. At the restaurant, I honed my skills daily as the right-hand man of the owner chef, learning French to blend into the local lifestyle. Just as I was considering staying in Paris, a mentor from culinary school invited me back to the States. At 30, I was appointed as the head chef at the 5-star hotel restaurant. I wonder why I decided to return. What would my life be like if I had stayed in Paris? I pondered these thoughts while watching the crackling fire. I once dated a French colleague, but we didn't marry. She later married another Frenchman and left the culinary world. If I had stayed in Paris, I might be married and be a father, possibly running my own small restaurant. But the reason I'm in this situation now is entirely my own doing. I realized this only after becoming an unemployed, single middle-aged man. When I ruled the kitchen like a king, I never doubted myself. What am I thinking about now? I should go to bed. I started this wandering lifestyle in early spring. It's now late autumn. The air has become colder in the mornings and evenings, and I'm getting drunk faster than usual tonight. Shivering as I looked at the old building where the ambulance had been, I quickly crawled into my sleeping bag. I woke up to the chirping of birds. The next morning, when I stepped out of the tent, I saw someone at the entrance of that dilapidated building. Looks like a woman. Before leaving, I decided to ask if there were other places nearby where I could set up my tent and fish. I packed up the tent, loaded it into the back of my van, and gathered my belongings. When I visited the building on the other side of the lake, I was surprised. Lakeside Inn, Parker? So, it's an inn. But it looks so run down. Without the sign at the entrance, I would have never guessed it was an inn. Excuse me, is there something you need? While I was looking at the building, a woman, who seemed to have noticed me, approached. Her hair was tied back, and she wore no makeup, but she was beautiful and looked at me with a furrowed brow. I've been camping by the lake for 3 days, and I plan to leave soon. I was wondering if there are any other places nearby where I can set up my tent and fish. Oh, you're a camper. There's been a camping boom lately, and weekends are in quite bustle around here. Because of that, our rundown inn isn't doing well. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to complain. I could sense a hint of resignation in her attitude. I'm not one of those trendy solo campers. I'm a drifter, camping out wherever I go. If I'd known this was an inn, I might have stayed. But I didn't realize it was one. No, I'm not blaming you. I'm sorry for being harsh. I'm dealing with a lot right now. She trailed off. Yesterday, an ambulance came here. Is that related to what's going on? I asked her. Yes. My father felt unwell yesterday, so we called an ambulance. I'm here to pick up his hospital bag. I'm in a hurry, so I'm sorry. Oh. A place to set up your tent, right? It's about a 30-minute drive from here. She started to explain while looking at a map app on her phone, but I stopped her. No, it's fine. I'll stay here a bit longer. Maybe I can help you with something. Please contact me when you're back from the hospital and have things settled. I handed her my phone number and email address. She contacted me the next day. When I visited the inn, she looked extremely tired, probably from lack of sleep. How is your father doing? I asked her. He's stable now. He has heart problems and occasionally has to rush to the hospital. This time it's for a checkup. So it might take longer than usual. It's a problem because we have a reservation for tomorrow, and I need to call the guests to cancel. She sighed and hung her head. Then, she tucked her loose bangs behind her ear and introduced herself. My apologies for the late introduction. I'm Emily. I introduced myself as well. She explained that the inn only operates on weekends, holidays, and during long breaks. Since I had set up my tent on a weekday, there were no lights on. Yesterday, her father, who was the chef, had been bringing ingredients into the kitchen in preparation for the weekend. But he had felt chest pains in the kitchen. Could you wait on contacting the guests? Let me handle it. What? You? Emily gave me a look as if I were joking. This place might be run down, but my father is a skilled chef. Cooking for yourself while camping is entirely different. I sensed a bit of anger in her tone. If it's all right, may I see the kitchen? When I asked, she agreed to show me inside the inn. This place may look old, but it's well maintained. I commented as I looked around, speaking to her back. Thank you. My parents started this inn when they got married, and I grew up here. That's why I take good care of it. She turned and smiled at me. Although it was a 50-year-old wooden building, the floors and pillars were polished and shiny. When I was shown the kitchen, I could imagine the chef at work. The tools were well maintained, and the dishes were neatly arranged. The commercial refrigerator doors and stainless steel work tables were spotless, exuding a sense of cleanliness. The floor, likely scrubbed with a special cleaner and brush after each use, had no trace of slipperiness and felt immaculate. Chefs can often tell a lot about a colleague's work ethic and even their personality by glancing at their kitchen. The owner of Lakeside Inn, Parker, seemed to be a true artisan, genuinely dedicated to his craft. We used to be open year-round. When I was a child, I often helped out because we were short-handed. But then a fancy hotel and a stylish campsite opened nearby, and we lost customers. Emily said with a sad expression, and continued. Now we only get enough guests for my father and me to handle. But with him hospitalized, it might be time to consider closing down for good. I'm at my limit. Emily bit her lip hard and then broke into tears. I placed my attaché case on the workbench and unlocked it. Inside was my collection of beloved knives. There were several well-used, high-quality knives, and I took each one out in turn. Each knife felt perfectly familiar in my hand. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. I'd never seen such fine knives before. They're custom-made and I've been using them for years. Want to try holding one? I handed Emily a knife by the handle. Wow, it's heavy. Much heavier than my father's knives. Are you a chef too, David? She looked up at me curiously. I used to be the head chef at a 5-star hotel restaurant in New York. When she asked for the hotel name, I didn't see a reason to hide it, so I told her. Emily looked astonished. And rightly so. It's a well-known hotel that anyone would recognize. How did someone like you end up here? Emily asked, peering into my face. After returning to the States and being appointed head chef at the renowned hotel restaurant, I was eager to introduce recipes, ingredients, and techniques I learned in Paris. Can we change the source of the vegetables? The greens lack flavor. We need to upgrade the quality of the beef. The lighting in the restaurant is all wrong. The food doesn't look appetizing. The timing of the sauce application is terrible. Is this how it's always been done? Who made today's staff meal? It's awful. My demands extended not only to the kitchen staff but also to the management. David, I understand your skills from your time abroad, but ingredient costs are rising, and this isn't sustainable, said Michael, the general manager, with a troubled look. Then let's revise the menu prices. Even with a 20% increase, my cooking will keep the customers coming, I said confidently, pressing him. That's difficult, Michael replied, looking grim. David, Paris-trained or not, you're overdoing it. Yeah, even with your skills, your attitude is a problem. His approach doesn't encourage learning. He should just leave. I knew I was seen as a demanding person and disliked by many, but I didn't care. I was confident in my abilities and believed those who wanted to learn from me should take the opportunity. I genuinely thought that way. I still think that way, but I do wonder if I could have communicated better. Back then, I behaved like a king. Eventually, some staff members began to suffer from stress-related issues and quit. One was diagnosed with a mental illness, and their family held the management accountable. The management, seeing the seriousness of the situation, decided to let me go to prevent further resignations. Thus, I took responsibility and was dismissed. I interviewed at several restaurants, but my impressive resume made it difficult for smaller establishments to hire me. Moreover, my demanding nature had made me notorious in the industry, especially among hotel restaurants, where I was seen as a high-risk hire. Unable to secure a new job, I gradually fell into depression. My behavior had spread misery and negatively impacted my life. I began to blame myself. While I had unwavering confidence in my cooking skills, I had plenty of reasons to doubt my personality. I became so anxious that I couldn't leave the house, but after months of being a recluse, I started worrying about my neighbor's judgment. So, I embarked on an indefinite, aimless journey. When I shared my story with Emily, she listened intently. Despite not being good at talking to people, I found myself pouring out my life story to someone I had just met. Maybe it was because I hadn't spoken to anyone since quitting my job, but I felt a bit lighter after sharing my feelings. I'm sorry for unloading all this on you, I said, with an apologetic smile. Not at all. Admitting your faults is not easy. I'm sure your future will be brighter, Emily said with a gentle smile. Oh, shall we discuss tomorrow's menu? Trying to hide my flushed face, I changed the subject. First, we used Emily's phone to have a video call with her hospitalized father. I am truly sorry for asking a stranger for such a favor. Emily told me you were the head chef at a famous hotel for 10 years. If you don't mind, I'd like you to manage the kitchen until I recover. Please, I'm counting on you, her father said weakly. We immediately started working on the menu. Although there was already a menu plan that Emily's father had prepared, I didn't have the detailed recipes. Given the freedom to make changes, I decided to stick to the planned menu but add French-inspired touches to the dishes. "Let me know if there's anything I can help with," Emily said. "Can you peel these taro roots?" "Sure." Together, we prepped and prepared the ingredients. Before we knew it, it was getting dark outside. "Aren't you hungry?" "I'll make something with what we have," I offered. "Really? That would be wonderful." I whipped up 2 dishes and a soup with the available ingredients, and we ate in the kitchen. "This is delicious. I can't believe you made such amazing food with just the basics." "You're the real deal, David." As I watched Emily's joyful reaction, I recalled similar moments from my past. When I worked at the high-end hotel restaurant, I was told countless times, it was delicious. After guests finished their meals, I would visit their tables and receive countless compliments. I felt proud and believed it was only natural for the head chef to get all the compliments from the guests directly. As I thought that I was the one creating the menus and recipes and training the staff, I took it for granted. But now, I realized something. I was just representing the team in front of the guests. Back then, I had a spacious kitchen with the latest equipment, high-end ingredients, and many subordinates. The restaurant had marble floors, expensive plates, and fine wines. Now, here I am, in the small, modest kitchen of an old inn on the brink of closing, sharing a simple meal with Emily. "David? What's wrong? Are you not satisfied with the taste?" "Oh, no, I was just lost in thought," I replied. I found myself thinking about my former subordinates who had worked so hard. Especially those who couldn't handle my strictness and ended up leaving. I wondered how they were doing now. "Come on, David. We still have some prep to finish. Let's eat quickly," Emily said, snapping me back to reality. "You're right. Let's give it one more push," I said, stuffing the remaining food into my mouth. We finished all the preparations by around 10 p.m. I had planned to pitch my tent by the lake again, but Emily offered me a room in the inn. "Tomorrow, we'll finally welcome guests." I'm a bit nervous. I lay in bed, unable to sleep. I hadn't felt like this in decades. It was like being a rookie all over again. While I was nervous about serving guests again, the anxiety of being the only one in charge was new to me. In Paris, and even after returning to the US, I always had colleagues and subordinates around me. I never realized how invaluable those who could anticipate my needs were. Being without them felt incredibly lonely. I never thought I'd come to understand this now. The next evening, it was time to welcome the guests. "David, you're fidgeting and can't stay still. Pull yourself together," Emily urged me. "Right, I might be a temporary chef, but the guests don't care about that." I took a deep breath and welcomed the arriving guests. "Welcome. We've been expecting you." "Wait, are you David?" A young male guest called out to me. "It is you. What are you doing here?" Seeing his face, I was so shocked I couldn't speak. "Jake." Jake was a former subordinate who quit after only 3 months because of my strictness. I had heard he suffered from a mental illness because of me and was undergoing treatment, but I didn't know what happened after I left. "Are you well?" "No, that's not right." "Long time no see?" "That doesn't fit either." I was literally at a loss for words. "I heard you got fired because of me, and I was worried." "I can't believe we're meeting here. Are you the one cooking today?" "Well, yes." Jake's unexpected words left me even more speechless. While Emily showed Jake and his friends to their room, I started cooking in the kitchen. Emily soon joined me to help. "You know, David, that boy Jake asked if I was your wife," Emily said, blushing. "Well, you are younger than me, after all," I replied, flustered. Holding the knife, I felt a sense of awe at working in the kitchen again. Having a place to show off my cooking skills, guests who appreciate the food, and colleagues to work with. I took all that for granted, I thought. With Emily's help, I finished preparing the dishes and brought them to the waiting guests. "Wow, David's cooking is amazing as always," Jake exclaimed in admiration. His friends echoed similar sentiments, taking photos of the dishes and saying it was too beautiful to eat. After introducing myself as the head chef, the party started. As I was about to leave, Jake offered me a drink, which I gratefully accepted. I'm working at an Italian restaurant now. I'm the chef and manager, Jake said, smiling and updating me on his life. When he worked for me, he was always scared, and I hardly ever saw him smile or even heard his voice clearly. I'm truly sorry about back then. I've regretted driving you to that point and ruining your life, I said, sincerely. I was scared of you and didn't like you, but I loved the food you made. I still respect you as a chef. I'm enjoying my work now. So please don't worry, Jake said, offering me another drink. Although I couldn't simply feel happy, knowing I had driven him to a mental breakdown, seeing his smile brought me some peace. The next day, Emily and I saw Jake and his friends off. Waving, Jake said, "David, your cooking is the best. I'll be back." After we saw Jake and his group off, Emily turned to me and said, "What are you going to do?" Jake said he's coming back to eat your food again. What? What do you mean, what am I going to do? I looked at her in surprise. Of course, once your father comes back, I'll leave. And don't worry, I'll make sure to get paid for my work. I need funds for my travels, I said with a smile. Emily laughed along with me. Overcoming this challenge together seemed to have created a sense of camaraderie between us. Until your father returns, I reiterated to Emily. Then, until then, I want to eat a lot of your cooking. I can't forget the taste of your dishes, she said. The taste of my dishes. I chuckled. All right, I'll cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner until then, I suggested to Emily, pulling myself together. Yay! Emily said, making a cute fist pump. Afterward, Emily took me to visit her father in the hospital to report on our successful work. It looked like her father would be in the hospital for about a month. Even after being discharged, it wasn't clear if he could return to the kitchen. At their request, I agreed to stay at the inn and take charge of the kitchen. I didn't know what the future held, but for now, I decided to stay here and help. We have another group reservation for next week. If your cooking gains a reputation, we might be able to open every day again. Not just on weekends, Emily said, looking up at me. With Emily in the passenger seat, I drove toward our immediate workplace, the Lakeside Inn, Parker. It wasn't the glamorous kitchen I used to work in, but maybe this lifestyle wasn't so bad after all. Emily, when we get back, let's have lunch and plan the menu for next week's group together, I suggested. Yes. I smiled back at her and pressed the accelerator.